Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you see me? Okay. Thank you for taking your time to join us. My name is Ineza. I'm here to welcome you to a great session, our dialogue that's going to happen in the next 1.5 hours. Before we start, I would like to request everyone who's joining to take a minute to introduce yourself in the chat. You can say your name, the organization you're coming from, and where you are located, if you wish to. And we are going to have a session where we're going to listen to the youth experience from across the world. Then we're going to have an exciting panelist of responding to the question, especially on how to increase youth contribution in climate action. And before we start, I would like my colleague to send out a poll, because we want to capture like the basic information so that we can really know if we are hitting our target audience. And I just also want to inform that this session is going to be recorded, but it will not be shared externally. It will be used on internal purpose, because we want to make sure that we capture most of the points that are going to be said. So without further ado, I can ask my colleague to send out the poll, and then invite my colleague, Ms. Eva, who's going to be the moderator of the event. Can you still hear me? My mic is very funny.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Awesome. So, Eva, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I was just giving a minute for everyone to be able to complete the poll. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are, just so that we are in different parts of the world. So today, my name is Eva Peace Mukairanga, and welcome to the Youth Climate Dialogue. Today's sessions will be discussing on how are youth driving ambition actions on the ground, and how can it be better sustained for a better future. I'm very excited to have amazing speakers today, and we'll be talking about climate change, why does it matter, and the most important thing is what solutions youth are bringing forward to tackle this global challenge, which is a huge threat to the whole humanity. So I think we had all a minute to be able to respond to the poll. I'll just start with inviting our speakers, and I'm very happy to say that we have among us the Chief Executive Officer of the Rwanda Green Fund, Fonerwa. It's a groundbreaking environmental and climate change investment fund here in Rwanda. It's operating to mobilize and coordinate finance to support delivery of a green economy. So without taking too much time, I'd like to invite Mr. Mugabo.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Teddy Mugabo, and I'm the CEO of the Rwanda Green Fund, Fonera. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Green Fighters for inviting me to be part of this interesting conversation. So I'm very happy to be joining this and look forward to an interesting discussion. So without further ado, I prepared a few slides, just a brief presentation really on, first of all, why. I think the moderator highlighted it very well. We first need to understand why care about combating climate change? Why do we think environmental sustainability is important? And then from there, I think it's important to also highlight what I'll be sharing, at least what we've done on the side of Rwanda. What are some of the strategies we've put in place as a government? And then I'll briefly talk about the fund, what we're doing, how we are you know, how we're impacting at least what we're trying to do to combat this issue of climate change. And then I will, you know, at the end, I would also like to, you know, focus again on this, why we're having this discussion today, what really could be the role, the potential role of the youth in driving ambition and ability to shape climate policy. So if you allow me, I'll go ahead and share presentation. And then at the end, I'll be very happy to take questions and from the audience. And yeah, so can you see the slides?
Yes, you can see it.
Okay. So before I begin, again, it's important to first of all focus on why are we meeting today. So I believe the theme, at least for this dialogue, is shaping a sustainable road in climate action. There are key, I would say, 3 things I believe are very important in this journey of addressing climate action. And those are, first of all, what is the commitment, or what is the commitment of governments? So how are governments committed to addressing this issue, this global issue? Second, what are the strategies that are being developed, or policies to be able to actually to be able to support this process of really tackling the issue of climate change? Third, is what practical solutions or tools or mechanisms are being put in place to address this issue. So I'll be sharing the story of Rwanda in this particular conversation, and the presentation will be focusing on those 3 things. First of all, understanding why should we be concerned with climate change? And then second, I'll talk about the strategies that have been put in place by the Rwandan government. And third, I'll talk about FONERA as a homegrown solution and mechanism, financing mechanism, which has been put in place to attract climate finance so that we're able to tackle the issues that we face. So first of all, I'd like to begin with this quote that was given by His Excellency, the President of Rwanda, Paul Kagame, as he attended one of the UNGA General Assembly missions. It basically says, as we look forward to development, we're not making a choice between environment and prosperity. We're rather looking at how we combine both, because one supports the other. I like to start with this quote because it again answers that in order for us to address this issue of climate change, we need political buy-in, we need prioritization at the highest level. And in the case of Rwanda, it's become very easy because the government of Rwanda has placed greater focus on the preservation of the environment as a foundation for socio-economic transformation. And then, you know, we may say why. Why is it important to really tackle this issue of climate change? So I just wanted to highlight a few, at least climate vulnerability in at least what we are facing as a country. So as you all know, Rwanda is a landlocked country with moderate climate and relatively high rainfall. However, climate change is already manifesting, and this is through increasing extreme weather, heavy rainfall events, greater unevenness in rainfall distribution, as well as prolonged droughts. Now, what these have done, what these have done to different sectors of the economy is quite substantial. So just to take an example is that Rwanda's, our biggest population, I would say 70% of the population of Rwanda is in the agriculture sector. And this is actually, when you look at it, it's subsistence agriculture, or which is dependent on rainfall. Therefore, as we experience unevenness in rainfall distribution, this has a major impact on crop, on productivity and yield. So again, that's why we believe that it's important that while we plan, whether it's through our sector strategic plan, whether it's the agricultural sector strategic plan, it's important that you know, at the policy level, we actually think, how can we continue developing, but thinking and actually knowing that climate change is happening, climate variability is happening. So how do we ensure that we adopt climate smart agriculture? The second sector I would like to highlight is the energy sector. So a big portion of our electricity is generated from hydropower. And therefore, if we have changes in rainfall patterns, this poses a huge threat on our energy or electricity generation. So again, these are things to think about how, as we, as the economy develops. I mean, it's very important to highlight that energy sector is very important in terms of economic development. So if we don't plan with climate change in our mind, then we might face huge threats and huge risks to our major economic sectors. Now, the last point I wanted to highlight is that in 2009, a study assessing the economics of climate change in Rwanda actually was done, and this estimated that that we could lose over 1% of our GDP each year due to climate-related losses by 2030. Therefore, this is how I have to say that this is why, and this is basically why the government of Rwanda has placed a great focus on preserving environment as well as tackling the issue of climate change. And this has been done, first of all, at the policy level. I have to highlight that we have several key strategies that have been developed and adopted by our cabinet. So we have the Green Growth and Climate Resilience Strategy, which was adopted in 2011. We have our Vision 2050, which clearly articulates that Rwanda wants to be a carbon neutral and climate resilient economy by 2050. We have our NDCs under the Paris Agreement. I have to say that Rwanda was the first African country to revise its NDCs, and we actually committed to a greenhouse gas emission of 38%, which is by 2030. This is quite an ambitious target. And then we also have the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol, which is basically has to phase out the use of greenhouse gases used in cooling systems to achieve the goals of the Kigali Amendment through national cooling strategy. So these are key strategies and policies which really show that Rwanda is committed to addressing climate change issues. Now, coming back to FONERA, so one of the things that were highlighted in the Green Growth Strategy were that, okay, yes, we have this strategy that has been developed. It basically covers all sectors, how all sectors need to be develop with a climate lens, in a climate lens perspective. But it's also important that we talk about finance. How are we going to achieve these goals? What are the financing mechanisms, or how are we going to be able to attract a greater level of investments to ensure that, one, we address with climate change issues. So this is the adaptation aspect, but we're also developing. So we might not be polluting at the moment, but we also have, we're an ambitious country and we want to develop economically. And this could obviously, we could start we could start polluting. So how do we ensure that we're developing in a climate resilient manner? This requires financing. Therefore, the National Fund for Environment was established in 2012 as a financing vehicle to achieve Rwanda's green growth and environmental protection goals. How we work, FONERA has played a central role in really helping Rwanda achieve its green growth strategy or implement the green growth strategy. We have been able to mobilize over $200 million from development partners. This includes development partners, we have domestic fees and fines, etc. And we have, I won't go into all these details, but this is just to show you that we have a very elaborate funding criteria as well as different financial instruments. And we're also in the process of developing further financial instruments to be able to support the private sector better. So again, I'll be talking very fast because I would like us to use this moment to really have a discussion. So these are the different windows. We have financing windows, the conservation of natural resources, R&D, technology, environmental, and climate change mainstreaming. So these are the different windows in which we provide financing, and there's also specific key entry points. Just to highlight, with the investments we've mobilized so far, the $200 million, we've used it to support about 44 projects. And this includes private sector, public institutions, as well as NGO and CSOs. Now, our return on investment to date, just to highlight a few indicators, we've been able to create over 161,000 green jobs. We've been able to support over 82,000 households with improved access to off-grid clean energy. And we've been able to protect over 23,000 hectares of land against soil erosion. Again, we'll be happy to share these presentations. I won't go into all the information. I also wanted to highlight, just to share with you two impact stories, or two stories of the projects that we've supported. We have a very big project that is being implemented in the northern province of Rwanda, in the Gicumbi district. So we've been able to mobilize $32 million from the Green Climate Fund to implement an adaptation project, really focusing on reducing vulnerability to climate change by enhancing capacity of targeted groups, but also reducing exposure of our local communities that live in this area. And so far, we've been able to, you can see the numbers. The project looks at sustainable forest management. It looks at soil stabilization, because the Gicumbi is a very hilly area. So we want to ensure that farmers can grow their crops, taking into the terrain, taking into account the terrain. We want to ensure that the rural communities actually living in areas that are not that are not risky to climate change. So we will also have a component of building climate resilient homes, as well as touching on agriculture, climate smart agriculture. Another project that I wanted to share with you, another project that we funded, is Ampersand. I'm sure some of you are very well aware of Ampersand. So Ampersand is a company that started in Rwanda that really has the ambition to electrify Rwanda's motor taxis. So this company approached Fonera. We were able to provide over $200,000 to the company to demonstrate that electric vehicles can also be an alternative technology. And through this support, we're very happy to say that the project was able to test this prototype, whether it's the technology, whether it's the demonstration, and from there it also informed the electric mobility policy, which now has been adopted by cabinet. So that's it I wanted to share. Now coming back to this dialogue, what can the youth contribute, or what role can the youth play basically in this journey of shaping climate policy? So for me, I just wanted to give this context first of all, because I think it's very important that as youth, we need to first of all understand why. Why do we think that climate change, is a concern to our, country's development? Now, from there, I think we also need to educate ourselves in understanding what is being done in the different. I see we have different colleagues from different countries. So in these instances, what is happening on the what is the role of the government? If you're the youth, what role can you play? It could be through advocacy. It could be through innovation. I believe that the green sector is one that requires us to be innovative because of thinking outside the box, but also green technologies. This is an area that is new. I believe that the youth can have such a big contribution. So I'll stop there. I would really want to hear questions from the audience. But for me, I believe that the youth has a very big role to play in advocacy, in being part of the innovators. And also, I mean, at the end of the day, the youth is the future. We are the future leaders. So we are, and some, whether you're still a university student, I think it's important to have to take this on and really drive. And I believe everybody has a role to contribute. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much. And again, very happy to be joining this conversation. Look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we already have our first questions from, I think it's Amuza Jr. He's asking if your file also is accessible for you, for someone out of Rwanda, but in East Africa. Sorry, you're still muted.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I didn't get who asked the question.
It's Amuza Amomuza Junior.
So the question was whether the youth can access the fund and whether they could access it from East Africa. Is that right?
Yeah, it's right.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for the question. So to cut the answer short, the fund right now is a national fund for Rwanda. So the only applications we receive are from Rwanda. However, if you were a youth or you'd also have to be whether it's an NGO that is registered here or you come and register a company, then in Rwanda, then that could work. So the criteria is that you need to be a registered NGO or registered company in Rwanda to be able to access our funds. Thank you.
Thank you again. I think he got his response, and also want to know, how does FONERWA envision the role of the youth in its missions? Is the process willing to meet the youth on the ground, or do youth need to prove themselves? Is there any system to be able to work with FONERWA?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Again, I actually wanted to throw back this question to the youth, to the audience. The reason why is, first of all, I think you understand the journey. You understand that, I believe that the government of Rwanda is committed, and whether it's to tackle climate change or whether it's to support the youth. So now from what I've just presented, I think it would also be interesting to hear from some of the participants in basically, where do you see yourself fit best? Do you want to be the policy maker? Do you want to be the project developer? Do you want to be to play the role of advocacy? So I think this would be good. I wouldn't want to answer on your behalf. But again, just speaking on the side of FONERA, I strongly believe that if you could just take an example, even when you look at our team, we're a pretty young, dynamic team, I have to say. A majority of our staff is actually in the youth bracket. So this is just to show you that even at the fund level, whether it's through the staff that we want to bring on board, we want to ensure that we have basically the youth is part of this change and part of this story. And we also welcome any ideas, recommendations. I think something that I've started to do quite often is having more talks with, whether it's university students, whether it's, dialogues like these ones, just to share experience or share our experience in what we do, because I also believe that this is one way of, I don't know if it's transferring knowledge, but also just to share what we do, or whether it's a university student that is completing their degree, maybe they want to hear from someone working in this sector, what their journey has been. So yeah, it could be vice versa, but I would also want to hear from the youth in terms of where do they see themselves, or where do you see yourself, and what concrete support would you need from whether it's FONERA, whether it's the Ministry of Environment, or whether it's banks. I would also want to push that question back to the participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we'll be having a breakout session. It's another question to reflect upon. And we also have a question by Mr. Dan Robin. He's asking, what kind of activities does the Rwandan government do to include youth in climate policy? And what kind of possibility does Rwanda offer the youth to come up with own solutions?
Thank you, Dan. So just to understand your question, are you saying this in the climate space, or just overall? Is it in this particular sector, or you? I just wanted for Dan to clarify. Or if you could repeat the question, I'm not sure I understood very well. Thank you.
Yes, it's in this particular sector.
Just repeat the question again, please.
Okay, yes. He's asking, I'm missing it in different chats coming up. Sorry.
Anyway, I think, okay, if I can just remember, it was basically what's the government of Rwanda doing to support the youth in this
Climate policy, no. What kind of activity does the Rwandan government do to include youth in climate policy? And what kind of possibility does Gwanda offer to the youth to come up with their own solution in this particular sector?
Okay, thank you. So I believe this would have been a perfect question for also our Ministry of Environment, but I'll try to answer your question just to give an example. And here, the Green Fighter can also you know, add to this. But I think, so for example, when it comes to COP26, I believe that as part of the delegation that goes to COP26, we usually have a representative from, of course, government, civil society, but there's also a representative of the youth. And in the past, actually, it's been the Green Fighter. So again, this is to show that we have, you know, just taking the Green Fighter as an example, this shows that we also, the country enables for youth to be active and form, whether it's, you know, just take an example of Green Fighter. Another way I would say is, again, through innovation. So we already, when you look at the population of Rwanda, if I'm not mistaken, 60% is really, as actually part of is youth. So again, there's the government's drive is to really ensure that, you know, considering that the biggest portion is youth, and so I believe that the youth is supported, one, through whether it's education, so like whether it's student loans to go and pursue you know, their degrees. In some instances, of course, it looks at the different sectors, but I also have to say that even the environment sector has been one of them. And then also enabling and supporting initiatives that are led by youth, and really ensuring that they're part of also of the discussion, part of the table, part of the you know, the table that finds solution to address some of the issues that that need climate policy to be in place. So yeah, so that's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we also had another question from Jacob. He's asking, what are the framework for sustainability the Rwanda government have, and what other African country can look up to in following this step to achieve clean environments?
So for that, I would like to highlight the policies that I mentioned, or strategies. I think in terms of frameworks, I think first of all, it's important that that other African countries, I don't know, some of them have, I'm sure Ethiopia and other countries already have, you know, green growth strategies. So this is something already that we have, and we've seen it work, because this has paved the way for a fund like FONERGA to be in place. It has paved the way or influenced different strategies that have followed, such as the Vision 2050. And then something that is key is also really revising and committing to the NDC. So we have the Paris, under the Paris Agreement, where countries are being called upon to revise and be ambitious when it comes to committing their climate action. So I think those are the two things I would start with. I would say it's important that countries have green growth strategies, but also NDCs is very important because it shows commitment from the government. And then from these, I think that's where you're able to put mechanisms in place, whether it's funding mechanisms. I think for Rwanda, FONERA has worked. Having a national fund to address climate change has really worked because it makes access to finance a lot faster. But also, we also use these strategies, they're opportunities to mobilize financing. So it's always easy to engage donors or partners because we don't have to say much really. You know, we have strategies in place. We have a revised NDC that is very ambitious. we have our target, and we know where we want to go. So I believe that these are the key lessons I would say that, or at least something I think that other countries can also do to be able to address climate change issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mugawa. I think I'll also say, like you say, in the green fight of being able to take advantage and be part in influencing the climate policy. We have also here Ms. Ineza who's following the loss and damage and also following the climate finance. So this shows like Rwanda is involving youth to be able to influence climate policy or in different actions. I hope I didn't miss any person during the questions. And if there's anyone, feel free to raise your hand and say your questions. Just giving you a little bit of a minute. I think there is Innocent who raised his hand. Can please go on?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
All right, so I really appreciate the presentation. It was wonderful and you people are doing a great job. Climate change, of course, it is the issue that is not only affecting a single community, place, country, or continent. It is affecting the world at large. So based on what you are doing currently as the organization that is trying to fund all the actions that are being done regarding climate change, I would like, what are your uniqueness? Because I know that all over the world, they are all trying to do actions, do things that can fight against this challenge that is disturbing the world. So what is your uniqueness? Like, what are you doing that is special, that like all other countries are not doing? And like, what can be your advice then to we as young leaders who are willing to also contribute to the fight of climate change?
Thank you. So I didn't catch your name. What's your name?
My name is Innocent from DRC.
Okay. Thank you very much, Innocent. Thank you for your question, and very pertinent one. So you want to know what the uniqueness of FONERA. So I think, again, let me try to talk about, yes, in Rwanda, but also say how this can work in other areas. I think the biggest challenge we have when it comes to addressing climate change is obviously we cannot ignore the challenge of access to finance, right? Because like you rightly mentioned, climate change is it's a global issue, and really addressing it only in Rwanda does not address it everywhere else. So we need, it's a collective action that we need to do. However, access to finance has been quite a challenge, I have to admit, that even though I showed you the numbers of the amount that we've been able to mobilize, but we do also encounter, it's not very easy. It takes time, it's, the resources required are quite significant. But having a national fund, I think it's really, I would say that what I would advocate for is for African countries to really look into ways of establishing national funds. Why I insist on this is that it's very hard when you have to depend to a third party to come and implement projects to address the issues that you know very well are on the ground. So having FONERA in Rwanda makes it very easy for us. We're able to work on proposals. First of all, when we work on proposals, the design process of the proposals, we have to go on the ground, make sure we consult the vulnerable people. We ensure that what the challenges they're facing is actually, the challenges are reflected in these proposals. And then we're able to make a case, right? We're able to make a case on their behalf where we're able to pull these funds. Now, when these funds come, again, we have to make sure that they're used for what they have been requested to do. So these funds come and they're again used to address that same problem. So one uniqueness of Fonera is that Fonera is unique because it's a fund that is at the grassroots. It's a national fund. So access to finance becomes easier, but we also have to make sure that it's owned by the government. And because at the end of the day, we know what challenges we have. We know what we need to do. So it's easier if this fund is at the grassroots level and is able to attract funding and then also deploy these funds. Now, the second uniqueness, I would say, of Fonera is that it is a national government fund, but it can be accessed by public institutions, it can be accessed by NGOs, it can be accessed by private sector. This is, again, very unique. It's unique because it caters for different institutions. We go further beyond and also try to see what instruments. So for example, now we want to really play a greater role in supporting private sector, not only big companies, but even the entrepreneurs, so young innovators, sort of like at the incubation stage. How do we ensure that if a student who's graduating from college or an engineer comes up with a technology, a green technology, how do we ensure that we accompany them? How can we support them at the business table? So again, I think that's another uniqueness of the fund, because we want to be able to really look at the whole ecosystem and say, what's the role of government? What kind of projects should government focus for? What kind of projects are NGOs good at? What can the youth bring on the table? What can the private sector bring on the table? So again, I think this is another uniqueness I wanted to highlight. So those two, I would say, are the main highlights. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think you highlighted how the cost is high if nothing is done. And I'm happy to not only see that youth are ambitious in driving climate action, but also our institutions. So I would like also to welcome one of our young climate leaders, Yacinthe Niyitegeka. I think also I missed one of the questions, but we'll be having also them in the breakout room sessions and share with them. Yacinthe is also a young climate leader here in Rwanda, and she's a water scientist and environmentalist who is passionate about climate change and environmental protection. She earned her degree in water and environmental engineering and a master in science in water management. She is working on addressing loss and damage caused by climate change, and she's committed to be able to influence different climate policies on the national and international level. Let me welcome again Yacinthe Niyitegeka. Hi, Yacinthe, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Hello, everyone. Are you hearing me, please?
Yes, we can hear you. I would like to know from your own perspective, how can we collectively—
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Yacinthe. I would like to know, how can we collectively build back better to act just to environment and planet? Can you tell us a little bit on how can we make a better space for young people and women, and what inspired you to be a climate change leader and driving climate actions?
Okay, Eva, thank you so much for the question. First of all, like to answer that question, first of all, we should understand we should understand very well the consequences of environment degradation, particularly climate change effects. And for for the younger people. They have already, many young people have.
Sorry, I think we lost her. Am I the only one who can't catch anything?
No, the audio stopped for me as well.
Oh,
She might be having internet issue.
the problem with internet. So as we move forward, she'll join us a little bit later, maybe. Let me also introduce another speaker we have among us, Clara. She's a researcher in the institute. She's a researcher at the International Institute for Environment and Development. She's also working on a piece on the options for financing loss and damage. And she's also worked with the Adaptation Research Alliance. Welcome, Clara. We're happy to have you among us.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Thank you very much for inviting me. So I was asked to have a think about some of the similar kind of themes and topics as the other speakers. And so I thought I would talk about, you know, how this idea of build back better can work and how it's useful and what might be good to think about there. And then also more on kind of how we as young people can get engaged and stay engaged and why it's important. So I thought maybe beginning with this idea of build back better. You might have heard this kind of as a phrase that's floating around, but then, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean all that much. Like sometimes I feel like there are a lot of kind of nice phrases and nice words, but not too much action behind it. And so this idea of building back better is when you're noticing that we're suffering from the kind of the three crises that are happening at the same time, the health impacts of the COVID pandemic. We're living through the climate crisis. And then also there's the economic crisis that's come from the pandemic and the impacts of it. And so how do we deal with these multiple shocks at once, noticing that they're all impacting each other and they can all have, you know, different ramifications for different people, and that you can't take them one by one. You have to address them all together because we don't have the luxury of just dealing with them one by one. So this idea of build back better is that we should have an economic recovery from the pandemic done in a way that supports nature and it supports climate change, and also that it can be used to develop the kind of safety nets that then protects like vulnerable people, like young people, old people, children, women, indigenous groups, and so on, protect them from climate impacts and climate shocks, because we're seeing more and more kind of daily impacts of climate change. And so there are different ways that, you know, governments can begin to plan for how you can deal with these intersecting crises. And we heard quite a bit about it through the fund and how great it is that you can then have proposals in Rwanda. You make your idea, you can apply for funding, and then you can access the funds to do things that are needed by the very communities that write these plans, and having the direct link between a community and the fund is really important. And so that's what's such a good positive thing about the way the fund operates. But there are different kind of larger ways that governments can go about preparing for dealing with these three crises that are all happening at once. So you could have your kind of climate friendly economic recovery plans. And this might be using your NDC, your nationally determined contribution, which are the plans that governments make to outline the steps they're going to take on climate change. There might be national adaptation plans. So incorporating those ways that you're going to adapt to the impacts of climate change as part of your economic recovery. And then next, you could begin now to see that we actually need to develop plans for addressing future crises and future shocks, whether or not it's a health shock, an economic shock, or a climate shock. And these can be used to, these plans that we develop can then be used kind of like as a frame, so that different funds can then, like, we can go to them and apply for funding for different parts of these plans and have a kind of framework that we can hang programs off kind of for long-term work. Because I think the most important thing is that with these kind of shocks that we're feeling is that when actions and interventions are taken to try and improve the situation, that the benefits actually go to people who are dealing with the problems on a day-to-day basis, and it doesn't kind of get lost in like a level of management or in like an international NGO or this kind of thing, but having direct access kind of at a local level to the funds that we need to make our communities more resilient to climate change. So for how, like, being able to then put local communities in the kind of the driving seat, as it were, for these funds is really important. But it means that groups at a local level need to kind of organize and understand and create a network to plan for these potential disasters in their community. And government can support this planning at a very, very local level to then make these plans and take them and move them up the chain towards maybe like a county government or a state government, and then up the chain into the national one. And so it's making sure that the kind of the high level of government is working to support the lowest level as we make our plans and go up through the system. So if you were trying to think about where it might be good to begin with these plans, and what kind of intervention points might be most useful to actually help people deal with climate change and loss and damage, which as was mentioned, I've been doing some research on. Quite a lot of solutions to this could be through kind of building people's day-to-day resilience to climate shocks, to economic shocks, to health shocks, through things like social protection. So that might be kind of different programs where you might have kind of access to work or access to social benefits or support immediately after a crisis, so that you're then able to rebuild without kind of going into your savings and reducing everything that you've worked hard for. There might be kind of different ways of protecting informal workers and people that aren't in consistent and regular employment, which is such a problem for our generation. And then also, lastly, you'd want to focus on making these efforts plan for like a long-term resilience, not just kind of short little projects, but trying to think of this in a really long-term holistic way, so that you have that kind of time span to support people over the long term. So one example might be that you could design a social protection program that rewards people for collecting wood or for selling fruits and things. But then if you do that, then there are ramifications on nature that you might not be kind of expecting, and that might lead to more deforestation and things like this. And so instead, you'd want kind of like that might deal with the employment problem. It might deal with the immediate things, but it doesn't support the long-term climate problem. So instead, we kind of want to think about long-term ways of approaching the problem of like, how is our generation equipped to work in a society dealing with climate change, and that is also in a changed climate. So I think that kind of idea of focusing locally and government supporting local level planning for disaster, and then having long-term recovery plans would be my kind of three points for building back better from the climate crisis, the economic crisis, and the health crisis. There was also a question put to me before this event about what how can different people participate in kind of climate action. And I think, as our previous speaker said, like having a group like this that is here to share experiences today, so that they can be channeled into the focal point that's going to the youth COP, and then being able to share them there is really important. There is a process called the Talanoa Dialogue, which is part of the UNFCCC, and that was at the climate conference in 2018, and it was something that the COP mandated, so that there would be a formal way of sharing experiences of people living through the impacts of climate change. So they were there in the same room, the same space as the negotiators, the politicians, and so on. And that as a process was a really powerful way of collecting stories, real life stories from real people that were there in the room, explaining exactly why climate change is producing irreversible damage to communities, to families, to land, to livelihoods today. And so us today forming this network and being able to share our experiences and channel them to the COP is another extension of that, which I think is a really important way of keeping people involved. So I'll leave it there for now. Ineza, Eva, back to you.
Thank you so much, Clara. And thank you for giving us your insight and calling on us to think long-term when it comes to climate change. You talk about long-term recovery, to think about local actions. And I would like to ask a little bit of a question. As IIED is an international organization, how do you ensure that local youth are included or empowered to act in their community, especially here in the Global South?
Yeah, no, it's really, really important. And some things that we've been doing, for instance, with looking at what loss and damage means, so that the bits of climate change that you can't adapt to. We've been ensuring working with different groups and different youth groups, including the Green Fighter, to come and join some dialogues that we've been having between different governments in the Global South, sometimes involving NGOs, sometimes not, to talk about what these issues for loss and damage actually mean in a very practical sense, not in a political sense or in a negotiation sense, but how you want this idea of loss and damage to be understood and to be discussed and to be researched, and sharing that knowledge backwards and forwards as well, to take kind of practical steps as to how like more young people, and especially young people in the Global South, are involved in these discussions.
Thank you so much. I would like not keep the floor for myself. If there's any other questions from the audience, you can ask.
If people think of things later, I can always type answers in the chat.
Yeah, true. I think we have a raised hand from Libogang. I'm sorry if I pronounce it very wrong.
Hi, yes, it's Lebogang, but you can call me Lebo. Okay, so this question is mostly directed at Fanera. Sorry, I'm so sorry to take up time of, IIED. But like, it was just a question regarding how exactly do the strategies that we've now put into place, and I suppose both organizations could answer this actually, the strategies that you've put into place, how do they make considerations for marginalized groups such as indigenous parties, and women and children that are affected by this? How do we then look at addressing climate change in such a way that it doesn't negatively affect them more than they already are? But yeah, thank you.
I could maybe provide an answer, and then Teddy, if you're still here, you're welcome to pick it up. I mean, from a kind of how we produce research that then supports policymaking in countries, we were looking at like we reach out to indigenous groups and kind of have formal interviews with them to understand their needs. So this idea, even as I was saying there, the idea that government can support local people to make the plans that they need only works if the government acknowledges your rights and that you have rights to live where you do as indigenous groups. And so being conscious of that and making sure that when you're suggesting policy to government that actually reflects the fact that marginalized people may not always be acknowledged by government, and how do you work to still support them when that might not be the case? And so it's something that I'm really keen to look into, and we try and make sure that that is a very centered thing in our research, to make sure that you're not suggesting stuff that just puts people to the side who don't fit into the group that's like easy to access, because that's not right. Eddie, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the pertinent question. I actually wanted to highlight, I think this is something I had highlighted, that for the projects that we fund, first of all, we have we have criteria, so funding criteria. We look at impact. So maybe just to explain, the way we finance projects is we mobilize funding from partners. Then we have calls for proposals. So we receive a number of applications, and through a very I have to say, serious process, we actually able to review and say that, one, of course, the projects have to meet the objectives of addressing climate change, but as part of our funding, some of the issues we look at when we're making funding decisions is issues that you just read. First of all, we look at vulnerability. So if we receive 4 projects that are being implemented in different parts of the country, we were able to use data available to say, okay, the Eastern Province is the one that is facing major droughts, therefore farmers are affected by climate change. So we were able to direct the funding where it's mostly needed, of course, from a climate lens perspective. Then we go under that, we look at the impact the project will have on the ground. So of course, numbers are important. So there's also the value for money aspect. So if someone is, if a developer is applying for $2 million, we need to be able to they need to be able to justify, like, with $2 million, how many, what are basically the indicators, how many number of households are you going to be able to support? And then from there, there's also a gender perspective. So in our proposals, in our templates proposals, we actually have questions where we ask, how is gender being considered? Because we all know that women, especially in the southern part of Africa, women are highly susceptible to climate change, because they're the ones who have to go fetching for water, they're the ones who have to go fetching for firewood. So we also want to ensure that the funding is also reaching to the really addressing issues that can also reduce some of this burden on women, or the burden on children, So we even have, we've started doing like impact stories, going back and saying, looking at the funds that we've provided, what are some of the success stories? How many, the number of children that have been able to now receive an education because they have improved cook stoves versus, where the case before was they had to go fetching hours looking for this firewood. So in a nutshell, I just wanted to say that this is something that this is part of our funding criteria and selection. We look at vulnerability to climate change. We look at impact in terms of, value for money, the funding versus what the impact will be on the ground. Then we also look at the gender aspects. And I'm very happy to also say that FONERA has recently, we have a we have an environmental social safeguard management strategy in place, as well as a gender strategy. So these are things to show that the fund is actually committed to ensuring that the funding we receive is used for the right things. And I think Clara also mentioned it, is we want to make sure that the funds actually address where, the funds go to addressing grassroots issues, and that's one of, I would say, the beauty or uniqueness of having a national fund that is attracting financing and directing it to where it's mostly needed. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your responses. I think we also have another questions. I think I'll keep you here until another hour. I'm sorry, but we're having questions from Milka.
Thank you very much. My name is Milka. I am joining from Kenya, and I had a question for Teddy. I listened to the great work that you're doing, and in my mind, I'm asking myself that, with the climate change crisis that we are all in currently is as a result of commercialization and monetization of natural resources. And the best ways that have been thought to be, ways that have been thought to be very useful in combating climate change have been around the use of traditional activities and practices that communities participate in their very local level, and that such has helped in keeping the most of the parts of the world that we have natural right now that are helping us combat climate change. And listening to you talk about the criteria and who becomes a beneficiary of the money, it becomes organizations and companies. So is in this a way of pushing youths and communities to joining formal kind of groupings which have in the past have in one way or another participated in the climate change crisis that we are in, than supporting communities that are directly in their traditional settings to support that which they have been doing to help us keep the climate in balance? Or just alternatively, which other ways are you making sure that you incorporate indigenous ways of life in addressing these climate change issues in the projects that you support? Thank you.
Thank you for the very good question. I have to say it's a tough one. I may not have the best answer, but I think what's the most important thing is obviously there's what we're doing, and I also don't believe that we're doing everything at its best, right? So. But it's also important that we are a fund, so we attract financing. So we also have to be accountable on how we use these funds. I'm sure you all know what it takes to mobilize funding from, whether it's development partners, whether it's through domestic revenues. We have to be able to have systems in place, but also have these criteria. So I think the intention of having this is just part of fund management, and so we need to have these systems in place to be accountable and to be able to ensure that what we're mobilizing, we're using it for the purpose. However, I have to admit to you, like you're saying, you might see this as sometimes it becomes a, and these are some of the sort of feedback we've received, especially from the private sector, that the process can be long, the process can be, and that's how we're trying to see ways in which we can come up with simpler, instead of giving $2 million, we're thinking of now we're working on developing an incubator program that could give smaller envelopes, like $50,000 to a young entrepreneur who may have a good idea, but is not yet there, really does not need a huge amount of money, but rather small amounts that can support his idea. So just overall, I think we're also learning as we go. I cannot say that at this stage we've managed to address all the problems or we're doing everything at its best. However, we are a flexible fund, and we also like to we have to be progressive. And I think some of these dialogues are also they challenge us. So we sit back again and say, what can we do better? Now, to answer the question on how do we ensure that indigenous, some of these solutions that are indigenous are not lost. This is something, again, I want to highlight, is that when we're designing proposals, it's not top bottom. So we go on the ground, of course, working with local authorities, but there's also groups at the local level. So through districts and the sectors, these are the different ways in which I would say different governance clusters. But we have stakeholder engagements that where we usually have participation from youth and women and different representatives, that first of all they identify that problem. Because one thing I've witnessed is that sometimes we think that the local communities don't know that problems or wouldn't find solutions. They do. So this is something we found interesting, that when the projects, sometimes when they're being designed, they actually take into consideration what has been highlighted through these stakeholder consultations, And in some instances, they also come up with their own solutions and they just need support. So, so just to say that when we fund district, for example, a district project, yes, the district applies so that we're able to have that accountability, because they need to have systems. We need to be able to transfer money. We need to have some certain level of reporting, but we also do close monitoring and evaluation, because this district applies obviously, but the funds are used to implement projects that are going to be supporting these rural communities that I've just mentioned. So I don't know if that's clear, but we also have to, we're in between, we have to ensure that we're able to track the funds. We can't just give, $2 million to local communities. That's why they need to be some sort of in a formal setting, whether it's an NGO, for proper fund management. Thank you. So unfortunately, I'm going to excuse myself. I only had an hour. So I wanted to excuse myself, but also really thank Ineza and the team for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I would have loved to stay, but I had already made another commitment. So I'm very happy to meet you, Clara, as well as all the participants with the great questions. And yes, so I just wish you the best of, continue having great discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We're happy to have you with us. And since we are running tight on the schedule, I would like to invite another young climate leader. She's a climate scientist with experience in climate change reporting and project management. She works with the climate change program at REMA, where she provides technical supports with ongoing projects related to national communications, final update reports, and any other activities related to implementation of the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. I think we'll be happy to hear from her experience and her own work. So please, I'd like to give the floor to Pearl Munsi. You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Eva Peace and the Green Fighter team. I don't know if you can hear me. Kindly confirm.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you so much for this opportunity that you've given to REMA to join this interesting conversation. Let me just do my video. So I would like to extend my Deja's regards to the team. She would have loved to be with you today, but asked me to share some information with you, and hopefully this will help with the discussion. So I'm just going to share a very brief presentation. I know that we are running out of time. Okay. I'll run through it so that I don't take so much time on the presentation. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, you can see it.
Okay. So I just wanted to put some facts together so that give some orientation to what I want to share. When it comes to climate change and we look at our context as Rwanda, our country is highly dependent on agriculture. So I thought to share this fact. Country is highly dependent on agriculture. For livelihoods will be among those that suffer significant yield loss due to changes in temperature, precipitation, and the frequency of adverse weather events. In many of these countries, including ours, the youth will join the agriculture sector labor force. Another fact, this comes from an unpublished report. As Eva Peace said, I'm part of the team that puts together some key information on climate change or current status on climate change. So we are seeing that about a 40% increase has been realized since 2006 when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, which is what causes climate change. So Rwanda alone is contributing, now is realizing that we are contributing increasing amounts. However small, but they keep increasing, which means with the development and the different changes that are happening in our economy, we are expecting more greenhouse gas emissions in the country. And projections also, when it comes to youth, the youth fact suggests that the youth in sub-Saharan Africa will continue to grow and will likely represent almost 22% by 2030, which is an increase of about 4% from 2020. So I know you know some of these facts, maybe I'll just also run through them. The UNFCCC is a framework that was agreed upon by a number of parties to support global efforts to stabilize greenhouse gas emission concentrations. And Rwanda ratified the UNFCCC and some of its, sister frameworks that all aim to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations and reduce limit temperature rise. So when we look at some of them, there's the Paris Agreement, which has an ultimate goal of limiting temperature rise to 2 degrees with an effort to limit to 1.5 compared to pre-industrial levels. So in Rwanda, as I've mentioned, we ratified and we try to fulfill our obligations under the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement. So what we do is submission of reports. Here in Rema, we're in charge of that, and we work with a number of stakeholders to submit reports on the status of climate change through national communications and biannual update reports. So far we have submitted 3 national communications, one in 2005, the second one in 2012, and the third one recently in 2018. So currently we are preparing what they call a biannual update report, which provides an update of the information that we reported in a national communication. Another commitment under the Paris Agreement for countries to be able to reach that ultimate goal of reducing temperature rise, global temperature rise, is submitting what they call a nationally determined contribution, or NDC. So all countries were obliged to, to submit nationally determined contributions back in 2015. And every 5 years, we committed to update this report. The report only provides a target of a country to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also take action on climate change adaptation, all to reduce that contribution to global temperature increase. So some of the other things we do as government of Rwanda is to put in place institutional frameworks and legal frameworks towards climate action. So among those, the CEO of FONERWA mentioned, so maybe I'll go a bit into detail in my presentation, but the Green Growth and Climate Resilience Strategy, we have the Environment and Climate Change Policy of 2019. We also have the revised law on environment, which was revised in 2018. So these are some of the policy and institutional frameworks that were put in place by the government of Rwanda. So when you go into implementation of these policies, or there are a number of strategies as well, which are related to them, which I haven't mentioned. But at the top of environment and climate change action, we have the Ministry of Environment, and it's the institution in charge of developing policies and programs related to environment and climate change. So we have what they call a sector working group, and the Ministry of Environment takes the chair position of this sector working group, all to implement to create an institutional framework, or say a policy framework towards environment and climate change action. So as an implementing agency, REMA was put in place to coordinate implementation of climate change policies and programs, and it chairs the Environment and Climate Change Thematic Working Group. So in this kind of role, under my program, the Climate Change Program, we prepare the reports that I mentioned. So as the CEO of FONERWA mentioned, we also we're happy to be the first Africa that submitted an enhanced NDC to the UNFCCC Secretariat. This only shows our commitment as a country, even though we don't contribute as much as China or the US, but we are committed to reducing global temperature increase by 2030. So we committed 38% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 in comparison to what we would have contributed if we didn't do anything, which is what they call the business as usual. So under this, I highlighted some of the adaptation kind of interventions or actions that Rwanda committed, which include strengthening crop management practices, capacity building, and development for cross-sector NDC implementation. We also have the GGCRS, which I mentioned earlier, which is the Green Growth and Climate Resilience Strategy. It has about 14 programs of action, and these programs are taking us towards enhanced climate action, if I try to make it as simple as possible. So some of the programs I thought also it was important to mention include agriculture diversity for local and export markets, climate data and projections, disaster management, and risk reduction. So I am highlighting some of these because these are areas that the youth is involved in and should be involved in more. So maybe I'll discuss more about these highlights as we go on in the discussion or even in my presentation. I don't know why my slide is not moving. Okay. Youth climate action in Rwanda. As the previous speakers have mentioned, and some of you in the questions have shown, commitment towards climate action as the youth. So I thought it was important to mention some of these, which includes initiatives in education and public awareness, participation in global climate policy decisions, which is the climate change negotiations that happen every year. The Green Fighter is a leading institution in this. Then we also have a number of green initiatives that work with the government and those that also work with private sector. These are really contributing significantly to climate action. Then I also thought it was important to mention key sectors, again, highlighting areas that we need to think about as youth and areas that are very practical and, well, not as cost effective as we would have wanted, but when it comes to funds, it's something that can be done by the youth. So this includes waste management, clean energy, sustainable land use management, climate action through ICT, and carbon sequestration campaigns, which is, contributing to forest cover, in simple terms. So as REMA, we have worked with a number of youth initiatives through annual support. We have the World Environment Day or National Environment Week activities. So every year we hold competitions and have some of these initiatives that are taking lead and doing significant work recognized. So back in 2020, we recognized 5 initiatives, which include Taka Belinda's Limited, Pantaleo Limited, that have innovative projects on conversion of waste to furniture. And I'm sure you have also seen some of their work or similar work that has been recognized or is yet to be recognized. We also funded or recognized Green Care Rwanda this year in the National Environment Week celebrations that does solid waste management by recycling. And a number of engagements with the youth take place, maybe that, I'm not going to go into, but a lot of work is done with the youth, especially those that reach out to government institutions, as Teddy mentioned. So there are a number of opportunities that various youth, organizations or individuals have managed to take advantage of, but it's also good to mention them for those that that are willing to come on board or try their luck with them. So we have the annual support, which happens with REMA, National Environment Week. Then there is the Youth Connect, which is an initiative supported by UNDP that supports green initiatives of individuals and also organizations, youth organizations. So we also have FONERWA, which funds good proposals towards climate change mitigation and adaptation. You submit your proposal, it is assessed by the FONERWA team, and taken through a screening process until you're granted access to the funds or recommended to do something different to be able to access the funds. We also have non-public sector resources, a number of NGOs, CSOs, a number of investors really are existent in Rwanda. And I think the most important thing is access to information. Information really is what separates someone that can access funds to bring their idea to life or not. So I think it's important as government for us to give access to this information, and I'm sure REMA, FONERWA, and others are trying their best to give access to the youth information of existing NGOs, existing private sector actors that can fund their ideas, although they may not pick them from this list of support, but I'm sure that through information, a difference can be made. Sorry, my laptop is being funny. So more opportunities. I just want to build on this. Maybe this can also facilitate the discussion. As I mentioned, we have the Rwanda NDC, we have the GGCRS, we have the National Environment and Climate Change Policy. These are all policy documents that can lead us to achieving enhanced climate action, to achieving some of the objectives of the Vision 2050. And as youth, considering the number of youth in sub-Saharan Africa, in Rwanda, there's a significant contribution you can make. So advocacy has been mentioned, system advocacy, legal advocacy. For those that have studied law, it's basically just doing climate action, but through legal instruments. We have awareness raising and capacity building. There's not enough awareness raising that's being done. It's like I said, information, access to information makes a difference. So there's significant work that's being done by the government of Rwanda. For example, REMA uses its environment and climate change mainstreaming division, which was a previous department, to teach government institutions, private sector, the youth, local communities on how far we have gone in climate action, the significance of climate action, and what their role is, what they can do in their different capacities. Another is research contributions. This is also an area that the youth should, invest in more or build ideas around. So I mentioned earlier about climate data and projections. Because this is an area we revisit every time we have to do, the national communications or biannual update reports, there's still a lack of information in climate data, for example, future climate data. And this is a priority in the GGCRS, it is a priority in the National Environment and Climate Change Policy. So the missing piece of the puzzle is to develop a really good proposal or, seek out for the right partners to contribute, the right information to government. or to influence policy policy decision by, presenting the facts on future climate change, on historical climate trends. This is just an example of something that is of priority to government, that the youth can contribute just by conducting research. And these are areas that the youth is very, has capacity in and can also access some training in. And then you make a contribution just by conducting research. So I just wanted to end on this. We can build on this through discussion. And hopefully we can have good. Thank you so much, Eva Peace. I'll hand it over to you. And I'm welcoming any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Pearl. You gave us a well-detailed information on REMA, and I would like also to come upon what you say about one of the gaps youth can tap in, which is on the climate data and protections. I think here in the audience, we have many youth. That's a great thing to think upon. And since we are running out of time, I'm going to take if there is any question we have for Pearl. We have one from Paul. He's asking regarding the support issue to youth with mitigation projects. He's part of a team that intends to set up an organization that will help local community local community access to carbon offset credits by protecting existing forests and planting as well. They currently need technical support to help us understand what policies affect such project and what structure can help us ensure we have quality project with little issues with additionality.
Sorry, Eva, please, let me try to read it in the chat. There was a bit of interruption. You say we currently need technical support to help us understand what policies affect such projects and what structure can help us ensure we have quality projects with little issues with additionality. So if I understand your question, Paul, you're talking about having technical capacity to participate in carbon markets, within the Rwandan context, if I understand this. So this is a fairly new area, I'm sure, because you have done some work in this. You're aware that this is a fairly new area for us, especially that we do not contribute as much greenhouse gas emissions as developed countries and so on. But we are also an active actor in an active party when it comes to carbon markets and mechanisms towards establishment of carbon markets. So I'm sure that REMA as an institution, once you approach REMA, when it comes to trainings, we do have access to carbon market approaches, trainings that we can link you to, or we can organize for you as an institution. We either create an environment where you can be trained as a company or as an institution, a youth organization, or there are also various trainings on carbon market approaches that we can introduce you to. So this is something, again, when it comes to access to information, REMA is available for this kind of role, giving access to trainings. Or if we have some funding, we'll just advise you and say, you know what, put together a proposal and we review it and see if we can fund regarding your needs. We look at your needs and find out if it requires funding, then this can be done. But when it comes to trainings and building capacity of your team, we you know, some of these trainings are made available to us, and we can also extend the same opportunity to your team. I hope I've answered your question, Paul. You say, who is the contact person we can reach out to? I mean, you can get my contacts from Eva Peace, and I can be able to connect you to the person in charge, because the structure of REMA made some changes, but once you reach out to me, I should be. But this kind of support is available when the actual trainings are also available. But once we have a discussion and establish your needs, we can be able to provide some support. So we can provide this information after the discussions today.
Thank you so much, Pearl. I'll make sure to forward the contact to Paul. And if there is no other questions, we've run out of time. I would like to invite every participant to write in the chat what climate actions they are doing, and to be able to hear about all of us, what climate ambitions we have or we are working on. So in the meantime, let me invite Ineza for the closing. And if there is any other question also, please drop in the chat. We'll be collecting them and address them to the speakers. Thank you so much.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much, Eva, for inviting me, and thank you for facilitating. And I also want to really share my deepest recognition for every speakers, especially the participant who took time to be with us and share our question, our thoughts on how can we ensure that we're being actively included, especially in the climate action. I know we had in the invite, we were supposed to be having breakout session, but because the discussion became a little bit more interesting that we anticipated, we are not able to do so because we are already out of time. But we did share this Jamboard in the chat. You can take the minutes, and we're going to share it afterwards with every participant. Then regarding the recording, we are going to share the link for the recording afterwards, depending if we get the approval from everyone to share it with the participants. And then I don't want to take too much of your time. I want to simply say, like, we are very thankful that you took time to participate and be with us. And we are also taking the opportunity to invite you also that we are going to have a second session, which will be on Friday, same time, same place, to be on Zoom. And the topic will be more about the climate justice, especially looking on what is the role of women and youth, especially in driving a change in policy level. With that one, I think I can wish you all a good evening or good morning, depending on where you are located. Thank you for being with us. Bye.